The scent of 1,000 white roses choked her each petal, a thorn in her heart. From the shadows of a centuries-old cypress tree, 8 months pregnant and utterly alone, Isabella watched the man who was still her husband slip a diamond onto another woman's finger. He was a millionaire, a titan of industry, and he was publicly humiliating her in the most lavish way imaginable. But Julian didn't know the secrets she kept the silent vows made to her in rooms he could never enter. He thought she was a broken little bird. He was about to find out she was the storm. The wedding was a spectacle of obscene wealth, a carefully orchestrated performance set against the breathtaking backdrop of the Villa d'Este on the shores of Lake Como. Tourists on the ferryboats paused, their cameras flashing, trying to capture a glimpse of the fairy tale. But for Isabella Rossi, hidden away in a secluded grove, it was the final glittering nail in the coffin of her marriage. Her husband, Julian Vance, a man whose name was a synonym for power in the world of international finance, was marrying his mistress, Serafina Dubois. The irony was a bitter pill. It was here, in this very garden, under the same ancient wisteria, that Julian had proposed to her 3 years ago. He had called her his anchor, his quiet strength, the one pure thing in his gilded, chaotic world. Now she was just an inconvenient truth, a swelling belly that marred his perfect new picture. Isabella rested a hand on the curve of her stomach, where their son, their unborn child, kicked gently, as if sensing his mother's distress. She had begged him, pleaded with him when he'd first confessed his affair and his intention to marry Serafina. "Think of the baby, Julian," she had whispered, her voice raw, with a pain so deep it felt physical. "He deserves a family." Julian's response had been cold, clinical. "I will provide for him, Isabella. He will have the best of everything, but I will not be shackled to a loveless marriage." Loveless. The word had echoed in the cavernous, minimalist penthouse they once shared, a space now stripped of her presence, her books, her art. Had it always been loveless for him? Had the quiet evenings, the shared laughter, the nights she'd spent soothing his anxieties when a deal went sour, all been a figment of her imagination? From her vantage point, she could see him clearly. He was devastatingly handsome in his custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo. He leaned in to whisper something in Serafina's ear, a gesture so intimate, so familiar, that it stole the air from Isabella's lungs. Serafina, a willowy former model with eyes the color of ice, threw her head back and laughed, the sound carrying across the manicured lawns. She was everything Isabella wasn't. She was fwa and flash, her public persona, as curated as her Instagram feed. Isabella was quiet, introspective, a woman who found solace in rare books and rainy afternoons. Julian had once claimed to love that about her. "You are my peace," he used to say. Now it seemed he craved chaos. The press was there in droves, a veritable army of photographers and reporters, held back by a velvet rope and a platoon of security guards. They called it the wedding of the year. The headlines were already written: "Billionaire Julian Vance weds socialite." Serafina Dubois in Italian paradise. Her own existence, her status as his legal wife, was a footnote he was ruthlessly trying to erase. His lawyers had sent her the divorce papers 2 weeks ago, offering a settlement that was generous by any normal standard, but insulting in its implication: take the money and disappear. Be a good, quiet girl. She hadn't signed them, not out of hope for reconciliation, but out of a stubborn refusal to make this easy for him. Her lawyer, a bulldog of a man named Marcus Thorne, had advised her to wait. "We have leverage, Isabella. The pregnancy is public adultery. Don't fold yet." But watching them now, seeing the triumphant smirk on Serafina's face as she flaunted the colossal diamond, a gaudy monstrosity that eclipsed the elegant sapphire Julian had given her, Isabella felt her resolve crumble. What was the point of fighting? He had already won. He had the world at his feet, the woman he wanted on his arm, and the power to silence any inconvenient truths. A gust of wind rustled the leaves of the cypress tree, a sudden chill in the warm Italian air. Dark clouds were beginning to gather over the mountains on the far side of the lake, a stark contrast to the brilliant sunshine bathing the wedding party. It felt like an omen. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a single discreet vibration. She pulled it out. It was a message from an unsaved number, but she recognized it instantly. "Patience, Principessa, the cavalry is coming." Isabella's breath hitched. A flicker of something she hadn't felt in weeks, a spark of defiance ignited in her chest. She looked back at the wedding, at the man who was erasing her, and for the first time that day, a genuine, albeit faint, smile touched her lips. Julian thought he knew everything about her. He knew Isabella Rossi, the quiet art historian from a modest family. He had no idea who Isabella di Sforza really was. And he had no idea that the silent allies she had cultivated, the powerful figures from a life he never knew existed, were about to descend on his perfect curated world like a gathering storm. The first drops of rain began to fall fat and cold, spotting the dark silk of her maternity dress. The performance was about to begin. The ceremony reached its crescendo. The officiant, a man whose face was familiar from celebrity magazines, pronounced them husband and wife. A roar of applause erupted from the guests, a symphony of the rich and influential, celebrating the union of power and beauty. Julian dipped Serafina in a dramatic kiss, a move clearly designed for the cameras. It was a perfect shot, a moment of manufactured passion that would be on the cover of every tabloid by morning. For Isabella, watching from the shadows, the sight was a physical blow. The last vestiges of the woman who loved Julian Vance died in that moment. The pain that had been a constant dull ache for months sharpened into something cold and hard and clear. It was no longer just grief. It was resolve. She had to leave. To stay any longer would be to let the humiliation consume her whole. Holding on to the rough bark of the cypress for support, she turned to make her way back to the small, inconspicuous car she had parked on a side street. But as she turned, she saw them. Julian and Serafina walking hand in hand, not towards their reception, but directly towards her grove. A small entourage, including Julian's best man and Serafina's maid of honor, trailed behind them, champagne flutes in hand. Panic flared in Isabella's chest. He couldn't see her like this, swollen heart broken a ghost at his feast. She tried to shrink back further into the shadows, but it was too late. Julian's eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto hers. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second before it was replaced by a mask of cold fury. "Isabella." His voice was low, menacing. "What in God's name are you doing here?" Serafina clung to his arm, her expression a perfect blend of feigned concern and malicious triumph. "Oh, Julian, darling, look. It's your ex." She let the word hang in the air, a deliberate sting. "I didn't realize you'd been invited." The small entourage behind them fell silent, their eyes flicking between the regal new bride, the furious groom, and the heavily pregnant woman in the shadows. The air crackled with a tension that was more dramatic than any staged ceremony. "I wasn't Isabella," said her voice surprisingly steady. She met Julian's gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "I'm still your wife, Julian, in the eyes of the law, if not in your heart. I thought I should witness the moment you committed bigamy." A gasp rippled through the small group. Julian's face darkened. "Don't be ridiculous. The papers have been filed. You were sent a generous offer. It's your own fault for not signing." "Generous?" Isabella laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "You call that generous a pittance to erase 3 years of my life, to buy my silence while you parade your infidelity for the world to see." My darling Serafina interjected, her voice dripping with saccharine pity. She stepped forward, her white gown pristine against the darkening grass. "You're making a scene. You're clearly overwrought. It's the hormones, I imagine." She glanced pointedly at Isabella's stomach. "Julian has offered to take care of you. Of it. You should be grateful." The dismissive wave of Serafina's hand towards her unborn child was the final cut. The carefully constructed dam of Isabella's composure broke. Grateful Isabella stepped out of the shadows, her presence suddenly commanding. The rain was falling more steadily now, clinging to her dark hair, but she didn't seem to notice. "Grateful that my husband is attempting to discard me and his own son like a corporate asset that's underperforming. Grateful that he's replacing me with you. A woman whose only notable achievement is climbing her way out of obscurity by sleeping with other women's husbands." Serafina's face flushed an ugly red beneath her perfect makeup. "How dare you, I dare, Isabella," said her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more weight than all their shouts. "You have no idea what I dare." She looked at Julian, her eyes boring into his. The love was gone, replaced by a chilling disappointment. "I came here today to see for myself what I was losing. And I have. I see a weak man, so terrified of his own heart that he surrounds himself with shiny, empty things to feel powerful. And I see a woman so desperate for validation, she'd build her happiness on the ruins of another's." Julian took a step forward, his hand raised as if to silence her. "That's enough, Isabella." "It is," she agreed, pulling her gaze away from him as if he were no longer worth her attention. "It is more than enough." She turned her back on them, on the gasping guests, on the man who was the father of her child. As she began to walk away, her steps slow and deliberate, the heavens seemed to open. The gentle rain transformed into a torrential downpour. Thunder cracked overhead, a sudden violent sound that made Serafina shriek and cower against Julian. But Isabella didn't flinch. She kept walking, her head held high, the rain plastering her dress to her body, outlining the defiant swell of her belly. She was walking away from her old life, a sodden, solitary figure against the backdrop of a ruined society wedding. Julian watched her go, a strange, unreadable expression on his face, a flicker of doubt or just annoyance that his perfect day was being upstaged by a pregnant woman and a thunderstorm. As Isabella reached the edge of the villa's grand iron gates, the distant purr of an engine grew louder. It was a low, powerful sound, the kind of sound that announced the arrival of not just wealth, but of consequence. A pair of headlights cut through the deluge. A car, long, black, and impossibly sleek, pulled to a silent stop directly in front of her. It wasn't a taxi. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, a vehicle that cost more than the average person's house, its black paint gleaming like wet obsidian in the stormy afternoon. The rear door opened with a quiet, expensive click. An umbrella, also black, unfurled, held by a chauffeur in a flawless uniform. He held it over Isabella, shielding her from the downpour as if she were a queen. From inside the car, a figure leaned forward. Isabella paused, her hand on the open door, and glanced back. Through the sheets of rain, she could just make out Julian and Serafina standing frozen on the lawn, their perfect wedding dissolving into a chaotic, muddy mess. They were staring, confused and wary, at the impossible sight. Who was Isabella Rossi? The quiet, discarded wife. The penniless art historian. As the first black car waited its engine, a low, patient thrum. The answer began to announce itself. Julian Vance was about to learn that the woman he had tried to erase was more powerful than he could ever have imagined, and her allies, the ones who had just arrived, did not play by his rules. The interior of the Rolls-Royce was a cocoon of silence and luxury. The chaos of the storm instantly muted by layers of soundproofed glass and supple black leather. The air smelled of old money and authority. Seated opposite her was a man Isabella had not seen in person for 5 years, though his influence had been a quiet, constant presence in her life. He was Alessandro Vincenzo, her godfather. To the world, he was a recluse, a legendary figure in European finance, the so-called kingmaker, who operated from the shadows, his wealth so vast and old, it made Julian Vance's fortune look like a rounding error. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair, piercing grey eyes that missed nothing, and a face that looked like it had been carved from Tuscan marble. He was family, not by blood, but by a bond forged in loyalty and secrets long before she had ever met Julian. Alessandro. Isabella breathed a wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled her. He reached across the space between them and took her cold hand in his warm, dry one. His touch was firm, paternal. Mia cara Isabella. My little principessa, did you think we would abandon you? Tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in front of Julian now welled in her eyes. I didn't know who else to call. You did not need to call. We have been watching, he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. We gave Mr. Vance enough rope to hang himself. It seems he has fashioned a rather elaborate noose. His gaze flickered past her out the rain-streaked window, towards the villa where Julian and his bride were now being ushered inside by frantic staff. He is about to learn a very old, very important lesson. The Sforza name is not to be dishonored. Isabella flinched at the mention of her family name, the name she had shed when she married Julian, hoping for a simpler, anonymous life. Sforza. A name that carried the weight of centuries of Italian nobility, of power brokers, patrons of the arts and figures who had shaped the destiny of nations from behind the scenes. She was descended not from modest art historians, but from one of the most powerful and discreet dynasties in Europe. A fact she had deliberately hidden from Julian, wanting to be loved for herself, not for her connections. It had been a naive, romantic dream. He never knew, Isabella said quietly, wiping a tear from her cheek. I wanted a life away from all that. A life that was just mine. And you deserved that, Alessandro said, his expression softening. But you chose a man who understands only one thing, power. He mistook your humility for weakness. He mistook your independence for isolation, a fatal miscalculation. The chauffeur closed the door, and the car began to move, gliding away from the villa, with a silent, imposing grace. As they passed the main gate, another car, a black Mercedes Maybach, pulled in behind them, and behind that, a black Bentley flying. A formidable procession was forming a funereal parade for Julian Vance's life as he knew it. "Who is in the other cars?" Isabella asked, her curiosity piqued through her exhaustion. "Allies," Alessandro said simply. "Family. People who owe your father a debt of honor. People who understand that when one of us is threatened, all of us respond." He gestured to a small built-in refrigerator. "Some water." He poured her a glass of San Pellegrino, the iconic green bottle, a small familiar comfort. He then poured himself a small glass of something amber. "Now," he said, taking a sip, "tell me everything, and do not spare a single ugly detail. Marcus Thorne has handled the legal preliminaries, but the real response begins now. We will be surgical. We will be swift. And we will be merciless." Isabella took a deep breath. For months, she had been drowning her story, unheard, her pain dismissed. Now she had the ear of one of the most powerful men in the world. She began to speak, her voice gaining strength with every word. She told him about the subtle dismissals, the gaslighting, the way Julian had slowly isolated her from the few friends she had made in his world. She told him about the discovery of the affair, the brutal confrontation, his cold-blooded proposal to Serafina while she was still living in their home, pregnant with his child. Alessandro listened without interruption, his grey eyes turning to flint. He was a man of few words, but his stillness was more intimidating than any outburst. When she finished, the silence in the car was heavy, profound. "He took your shares in Vance Industries as part of the prenuptial agreement." "Correct," Alessandro asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Yes," Isabella confirmed. "He said it was a formality. He put them in a blind trust managed by his board." Alessandro smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. "His board," he mused. "Let's talk about his board. Robert Chen, head of Asian markets. His company was on the brink of collapse in 2008. Your father personally guaranteed a loan that saved him, a loan he never called in." He ticked off a finger. "Lady Annalise Beaumont, British aristocrat with impeccable connections. Her family's estate was about to be seized for back taxes. A word from your uncle to the right people in Parliament made that problem disappear." He ticked off another finger. "And my personal favorite, Javier Morales, the tech guru from Spain. A brilliant mind, but he had a youthful indiscretion involving some rather sensitive government data. Your cousin, the one who works in intelligence in Rome, made sure the file was permanently buried." Isabella stared at him, stunned. She knew her family was influential, but the scale of their reach, the intricate web of favors and debts, was something she had never truly comprehended. 3 of the 7 board members of Vance Industries, Alessandro continued, his smile widening, owe their entire careers, their very freedom to the Sforza family. They have been waiting for a call, for a chance to repay that debt. I believe that call will be made tonight before Mr. Vance and his new bride have even finished their wedding cake." He leaned back against the leather. "He wanted to erase you, Isabella. Instead, he has made you visible to us again. He has reminded us of our obligation to you. By the time the sun rises over Lake Como tomorrow, Julian Vance will find that the empire he built is a house of cards. And we," he said with a final chilling finality, "are the wind." The convoy of black cars did not head for an airport or a hotel. Instead, it wound its way up a steep private road, deep into the hills overlooking the lake, a region tourists never saw. They passed through an ancient stone archway, unmarked and unadorned, and arrived at a sprawling, secluded estate that had been in the Sforza family for over 400 years, the Villa Falcone. The Falcon Villa. It was not a place of opulent display like the Villa d'Este, but one of quiet, unassailable power. It was Isabella's childhood home, a place she hadn't returned to since her mother's funeral. As the Rolls-Royce crunched to a halt on the gravel driveway, the doors to the villa swung open. A staff of familiar, loyal faces greeted her, not with pity, but with a quiet, fierce respect. Benvenuta. A casa principessa, the elderly butler, Massimo, said, his voice thick with emotion. Welcome home. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of beeswax and old stone. The men from the other cars were already there, gathered in the grand library, a 2-story room lined with priceless books and dominated by a massive, centuries-old fireplace. They were the allies Alessandro had spoken of, a formidable assembly of power. There was Kenji Tanaka, a Japanese industrialist whose quiet demeanor belied a ruthless business acumen. His father had been saved from a hostile takeover by Isabella's grandfather. He bowed deeply to her. Isabella-san, it is an honor to stand with you. Next to him stood Sheikh Rashid Al-Jamil, a member of a powerful Emirati royal family whose investments controlled significant portions of the global energy market. He had attended Oxford with Isabella's older brother, and they were bound by a friendship that transcended business. Isabella, he said, his voice warm, but his eyes hard. Tell me what you need. It is yours. And then there was Elena Petrova, a woman who looked more like a Bond villain than a businesswoman. Sharp, elegant, and notoriously brilliant, she was the CEO of a global private security and intelligence firm. Her connection was the most personal. Isabella's mother, a renowned philanthropist in her own right, had rescued Elena from a trafficking ring in Eastern Europe when she was just a teenager and funded her education. Elena owed her entire life to the Sforza matriarch. He will not know what hit him, Elena said, her Russian accent clipping her words with precision. My teams are already in place. We have been running passive surveillance on Vance Industries for the past 48 hours. We have found irregularities. Many irregularities. This was the true nature of her family's power. It wasn't just wealth. It was a global network of loyalty, a tapestry of debts of honor that could be called upon at a moment's notice. Julian had tried to humiliate a woman he thought was alone. He had, in fact, declared war on a dynasty. Alessandro took his place at the head of the massive oak table. Friends, he began. Thank you for coming. Our purpose is simple. We are here to rebalance the scales. Julian Vance has committed an offense not just against Isabella, but against the honor of our collective houses. He turned to a large screen that descended silently from the ceiling. Elena, if you would. Elena Petrova stepped forward, a tablet in her hand. With pleasure. An organizational chart of Vance Industries appeared on the screen. As we know, Vance's empire is built on 3 pillars: finance technology and luxury real estate. It appears strong, but it is over-leveraged. He has been using creatively, and I use that word generously structured debt to finance his acquisitions. He's been shuffling assets between shell corporations to hide losses and inflate his company's valuation. She swiped the tablet, and a complex web of transactions appeared on the screen, flowing between entities in the Cayman Islands, Panama, and Liechtenstein. My forensic accountants have found the pattern. It's a classic Ponzi scheme, albeit a very sophisticated one. He uses the influx of capital from new investors to pay off the old ones, all while siphoning millions into his personal accounts, like the one used to pay for today's theatrical production. Isabella felt a chill. She had always known Julian was ambitious, even ruthless, but she had never imagined he was a common criminal dressed in a bespoke suit. The key, Elena continued, is investor confidence. His entire empire is built on his reputation as an infallible financial genius. If that reputation were to crumble, if his key investors were to pull out simultaneously, the entire structure would collapse within hours. Sheikh Rashid leaned forward. My sovereign wealth fund has a significant position in his latest tech venture. We were planning on doubling our investment next quarter. He smiled thinly. I believe I will be instructing my fund managers to divest. Immediately, citing a loss of confidence in senior management. Kenji Tanaka nodded. My corporations supply the rare earth minerals for his tech division. I foresee significant, unavoidable supply chain disruptions starting at midnight Tokyo time. It would be a tragedy. Alessandro turned his gaze to Isabella. And the board members I mentioned earlier, Robert Chen, Lady Annalise Beaumont, Javier Morales, they are waiting for one call. They control 40% of the voting shares, enough to call an emergency meeting and force a vote of no confidence, enough to authorize an independent audit, which, thanks to Elena's work, we know will be devastating. He slid a satellite phone across the table to Isabella. The call should come from you, Principessa. Isabella looked at the phone, then at the faces around the table. They were not acting out of pity. They were acting out of a shared code of honor that Julian, in his arrogance, could never comprehend. He had broken the rules of their world, and this was the consequence. She picked up the phone, her hand steady. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. It was about protecting her son's future from the toxic legacy of his father. It was about reclaiming her own name. Put Robert Chen on, she said, her voice clear and strong. While she made the calls one by one, methodically dismantling the board that supported her husband, Eleanor projected another image onto the screen. It was a live feed from a high-powered surveillance camera aimed at the grand ballroom of the Villa d'Este. The party was in full swing. Julian and Serafina were dancing, bathed in the warm glow of candlelight, oblivious to the storm that was about to break over their heads. They looked happy, triumphant. Julian raised a glass of champagne, no doubt toasting to his new life, his new wife, his perfect future. In the quiet library of the Villa Falcone, surrounded by her hidden allies, Isabella watched him on the screen. She felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a character in a movie, a man she used to know. The man on the screen was a fraud, and his world was a fiction. The first alert came to Sheikh Rashid's phone. A single discreet buzz. He glanced at it. The markets in Asia will open in 1 hour, he announced to the room. My sell order has been placed. It will be the first trade of the day, a multi-billion-dollar divestment. It will trigger every automated alert system in the financial world. Elena smiled. And my anonymous tip, complete with a starter package of incriminating documents, has just been delivered to the desk of the top financial investigative journalist at the Wall Street Journal. Her name is Catherine Miles. She is famously tenacious. Alessandro Vincenzo raised his glass of amber liquid. To new beginnings, he said, looking not at the screen, but at Isabella. Isabella nodded, a feeling of grim, resolute power settling over her. The trap was set. All the pieces were in place. Outside the storm over Lake Como had passed, leaving behind a sky of impossible clarity filled with stars. But for Julian Vance, The real storm was just about to hit. The first sign of trouble at the wedding reception was subtle. A senior aide approached Julian, whispering urgently in his ear, while he was in the middle of a self-congratulatory speech. Julian's smile tightened, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. He waved the aide away, determined not to let anything spoil his moment. But a few minutes later, another aide appeared, this one looking pale and frantic. He thrust a tablet into Julian's hands. On the screen was the pre-market data from the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Vance Industries, VNC, was in free fall, a catastrophic vertical drop of 60%. The cause was listed as a massive, unexpected sell-off from a major institutional investor, the Al Jamil Sovereign Wealth Fund. Julian's blood ran cold. He excused himself abruptly, leaving a bewildered Serafina on the dance floor. He rushed to a private study, his top financial advisors already patched in on a frantic conference call. Panic laced their voices. "What the hell is going on? Why would Rashid pull out?" "I just spoke to his people last week," Julian roared into the phone. "We don't know," his CFO stammered. Their official statement just hit the wires. A sudden and total loss of confidence in VNC's executive leadership and financial transparency. "Julian, this is a disaster. It's triggering a cascade. Every hedge fund is trying to short us." Before he could process the first blow, his phone buzzed with a news alert. It was from the Wall Street Journal. The headline was a dagger to the heart. Vance Industries' House of Cards leaked documents suggest massive fraud, SEC investigation likely. The article was brutal, meticulous. It detailed the shell corporations, the inflated assets, the very creative accounting methods Elena's team had uncovered. It didn't make outright accusations, but it asked pointed, devastating questions, quoting anonymous sources deep within the European financial sector and close to the Vance Industries board. It was signed by Catherine Miles. "Get our PR team on this. Kill the story, sue them." Julian yelled, sweat beading on his forehead. "We can't," his head of communications squeaked. "They're not alleging, they're just reporting on leaked documents. It's airtight journalism. And, Julian, it's already been picked up by Reuters, Bloomberg, and the AP. It's everywhere." Then came the final fatal blow. An email landed in his inbox with the subject line, "Emergency Board Meeting Notification." It was from the office of Lady Annalise Beaumont. The meeting was scheduled for 1 hour from now. The agenda, a vote of no confidence in the CEO, and a motion to launch a full independent forensic audit of the company's finances. The motion was co-sponsored by Robert Chen and Javier Morales. Julian stared at the names. Chen, Beaumont, Morales. It was impossible. They were his staunchest allies, men and women whose loyalty he had taken for granted. He had built his board to be a rubber stamp, a collection of powerful people who owed him. Or so he thought. He felt the floor drop out from beneath him. This wasn't a random market fluctuation or a negative press story. This was a coordinated attack. It was an execution. His mind raced, searching for the source, the architect of this symphony of destruction. And then, like a ghost rising from a grave, the image of Isabella walking away in the rain, her head held high, flashed in his mind. He remembered the impossible arrival of the black Rolls-Royce, the quiet dignity that had replaced her grief. Her final words, "You have no idea what I dare." It couldn't be. Isabella, the quiet, unassuming art historian, the woman he had plucked from obscurity. How his office door burst open. It was Serafina, her face a mask of rage and confusion. "Julian, What is happening? My father just called me. He said, "Your stock is worthless." People are leaving the party. Everyone is on their phones. They're looking at us like we're criminals. Get out. Serafina. Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet. What? Don't you talk to me like that. I am your wife. A title that will be worth precisely nothing by morning. He snarled, the full weight of his ruin crashing down on him. This is all her fault. Isabella. Serafina stared at him bewildered. Isabella. What could she possibly have to do with this? She's a nobody. A nobody. Julian laughed, a wild, unhinged sound. We are fools, Serafina. We are absolute, complete fools. He had been so blinded by his own perceived brilliance, so dismissive of the woman he had married, that he had never once thought to look into her past beyond the superficial story she had presented. Who was she? Who were her people, who arrived in black cars to spirit away a discarded wife? The world he had built, the empire of glass and steel and digital code, was shattering around him. The calls were coming in a relentless flood. Lenders were pulling his lines of credit. Business partners were invoking termination clauses. The SEC had already announced a formal investigation. It was over. In the space of a single wedding dance, he had gone from a titan of industry to a pariah. Back at the Villa Falcone, Isabella and her allies watched the fallout on the screen in quiet satisfaction. They saw the news reports, the plunging stock tickers, the photos of panicked guests fleeing the lavish wedding reception. They saw Serafina arguing with her father on the phone, her fairy tale wedding dress now looking like a foolish costume in the face of utter financial ruin. Then Elena put a new image on the screen. It was a live feed from the security cameras outside the private study at the Villa d'Este. They watched as Julian, looking like a cornered animal, made a call. "We have audio," Elena said. Julian's voice, strained and desperate, filled the library. "Marcus. Get me Marcus Thorne." There was a pause. "What do you mean he's no longer representing me?" "He can't just quit. On whose authority?" "Isabella's." The phone clattered as Julian dropped it. He slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. He was utterly, completely alone. His own lawyer had defected. Alessandro Vincenzo turned to Isabella. Her face was calm, resolute. There was no glee, no triumphant celebration, just a profound, quiet sense of justice being served. "He will try to contact you," Alessandro said. "He will beg. He will threaten. He will promise you anything." "It won't matter," Isabella replied, placing a hand on her belly. "This was never about money. It was about respect. The respect he refused to give me or our son." She looked at the powerful figures assembled around her, and the respect he showed to no one. The final piece of their plan was yet to come. It was the most personal, the most cutting. Elena brought up another file on the screen. It was a dossier, complete with photographs and financial records. Serafina Dubois. Elena announced. While she was seeing Julian, she was also continuing a long-term affair with a certain aging Swiss banking tycoon, a man who happens to be one of Julian's primary business rivals. More interestingly, she has been feeding this rival information about Julian's business dealings for the past 18 months, for a very handsome fee. Sheikh Rashid let out a low whistle. So the viper in his bed was also a spy. "We will leak this tomorrow," Alessandro said. after his financial ruin is complete. It is important that he understands the full scope of his failure, that the woman for whom he destroyed his family was in fact an architect of his downfall as well. He looked at Isabella. A final poetic justice. Isabella gave a single slow nod. The humiliation would be absolute. He had traded a diamond for a shard of glass, and now he would be forced to see it. He hadn't just been outplayed. He had been a fool, and in his world there was no greater sin. Dawn broke over Lake Como with a cruel, painterly beauty. Ribbons of rose and gold bled across the sky, reflecting on the placid water, mocking the utter chaos of Julian Vance's inner world. He stood on the grand terrace of the Villa d'Este, not as a triumphant groom, but as a king surveying the ashes of his kingdom. The air, which 24 hours ago had been electric with applause and champagne-fueled laughter, was now heavy and still thick with the funereal scent of thousands of wilting white roses and stale, spilled alcohol. The silence was the most damning indictment of all, a profound cavernous emptiness where adoration used to be. His world had not just collapsed. It had been systematically, brilliantly, and silently dismantled in less than 12 hours. He had spent the night in a state of escalating panic, a caged animal rattling the bars of a prison he hadn't known existed. His frantic calls to bankers, to board members, to politicians had been met with a chilling uniform wall of silence. Voicemails went unreturned. Aides who once jumped at his shadow now sent terse, formal emails of resignation. He turned on a television in one of the suites only to see his own face staring back from a financial news program. A panel of sharp-tongued analysts were picking apart the bones of his empire with a kind of gleeful, clinical precision. They used words like hubris, house of cards, and a textbook case of narcissistic overreach. They showed a picture of him and Serafina from the wedding, their triumphant kiss now looking like a grotesque prelude to a tragedy. Then they flashed a picture of Isabella, a candid shot from years ago looking thoughtful and serene. The question everyone is asking, the anchor said, is who is the woman at the center of this storm, the quiet wife who it seems held all the cards? The story of Serafina's betrayal was the salt in the wound. It had broken online in the early hours of the morning, a sordid little tale of corporate espionage packaged for maximum humiliation. He could picture it perfectly, her whispered secrets to his rival over candle-lit dinners, her dismissive laughter about his ambitions behind his back. The woman for whom he had torched his life hadn't just been unfaithful. She had been a willing saboteur, another architect of his ruin. She had vanished before midnight, after a venomous argument in which she had accused him of deceiving her about the stability of his wealth. The irony was so bitter it tasted like poison. He was truly, utterly alone. A pariah, adrift in the wreckage of a life he had designed. It was in this state of absolute desolation that he saw it a single, unremarkable black sedan purring up the long driveway. It was not a car of a friend or an associate. It lacked the ostentation of his world. It was a vehicle of purpose, of grim function. A man in a simple, well-tailored suit emerged, his face impassive. He wasn't a chauffeur or a bodyguard. He was a messenger. He walked directly up to Julian, handed him a thick, cream-colored envelope and said, "From the office of Marcus Thorne." Then he turned and left his job complete. Marcus Thorne, his own lawyer. The bulldog he had paid a fortune to be his shield was now apparently a sword aimed at his throat. His hands trembled as he broke the wax seal which was stamped not with a law firm's logo, but with the intricate crest of a falcon. Inside were the divorce papers. They were not the papers he had sent Isabella. These were a different beast entirely. The language was cold, precise, and absolute. It was not a negotiation. It was a decree. He scanned the first few clauses, a flicker of incredulous hope sparking within him. She wasn't contesting the prenup. She was claiming no portion of his fortune, no alimony, no settlement from his now worthless stocks or frozen accounts. For a delirious second, he thought it was a mistake, an act of foolish, wounded pride. Then he turned the page to the addendum titled Reclamation of Premarital Assets of Isabella di Sforza Vance. Sforza. The name he had heard Alessandro Vincenzo speak in the library at Villa Falcone. The name that now seemed to seethe on the page. He began to read, his blood turning to ice. The list wasn't the modest collection of art, and the small inheritance he had condescendingly logged when their prenuptial agreement was drafted. It was a portfolio of such staggering scale and strategic importance that the air left his lungs. He saw a controlling interest in a Congolese mining conglomerate that held the exclusive rights to the cobalt that was essential to Vance Industries' tech division. He had spent 2 years aggressively negotiating that supply chain, never knowing he was negotiating with his own wife's ancestral holdings. He saw the deed to a vast tract of land in the UAE, the very land upon which Sheikh Rashid Al Jamil was building a multi-billion-dollar refinery, a project partially funded by a loan guaranteed by Vance Industries. The loan was now collateral against her land. The list went on and on. There were seed capital funds that had financed the very tech startups he had later acquired for a premium. There were trusts that owned the patents for key logistical software his empire relied upon. It was a web of power, silent and invisible, that had underpinned his entire ascent. He hadn't been a king. He had been a glorified manager, a court jester playing with the Queen's gold and thinking it was his own. His genius had been in leveraging assets she had quietly placed in his path, and he had been too arrogant, too blinded by his own reflection, to ever ask the source of his good fortune. The final pages were the most devastating. It was the custody agreement for their son. The language was surgical. It stripped him of all legal claims. No parental rights shall be granted. No contact shall be permitted. The child's surname will be Sforza. A trust funded exclusively by the assets of the mother will provide for the child's welfare and education in perpetuity. Julian Vance will be treated in the eyes of the law as a sperm donor with no further role. He was erased. The very act of annihilation he had intended for her had been turned back on him with a finality that was absolute. He had tried to discard her and his son, and in return her ancient, powerful family had stripped him of his company, his reputation, his legacy, and even his fatherhood. Miles away, bathed in the gentle morning light, Isabella stood on a sun-drenched balcony at the Villa Falcone. She wore a simple white linen dress, her hair unbound, her face serene. She was a world away from the weeping, broken woman who had hidden in the cypress grove. Alessandro Vincenzo joined her, handing her a cup of steaming herbal tea. "It is done," he said, his voice a quiet rumble. "He has received the papers." "And the company?" She asked, her gaze fixed on the tranquil horizon. "The board has accepted our offer. Marcus Thorne proved very persuasive," Alessandro said with a thin smile. "Through a series of proxies, the Sforza Consortium will acquire the salvageable assets, the tech patents, the infrastructure for a fraction of their worth. We will absorb them, cleanse them of his corrupt practices, and fold them into our own enterprises. We will build something stable, something honorable." He paused, looking at her with paternal pride. It will form the basis of a new legacy, a birthright for your son, a testament to his mother's strength. Isabella placed a hand over her swelling belly, where a gentle flutter reminded her of the future she now commanded. This had ceased to be about Julian long ago. It was about this life, this innocent child, who deserved to be born into a world of honor, not into the shadow of a disgraced man. Her phone buzzed softly on the stone balustrade. A message from Elena Petrova. It contained a single high-resolution photograph taken from a distance. It was Julian crumpled on the steps of the Villa d'Este, the cream-colored envelope in his hand. He looked hollowed out, a ghost haunting the ruins of his own party, small and utterly defeated against the grandeur of the setting. For a moment she looked at the image of the man she had once loved, the man who had caused her such profound pain. She felt nothing. No anger, no pity, no triumph. Only a vast, quiet distance. He was a chapter from a book she had already finished reading. With a simple, deliberate motion of her thumb, she deleted the image forever. He no longer warranted even a flicker of her attention. Below in the gravel driveway, the black Rolls-Royce Phantom waited its engine, a low, patient hum. Massimo, the butler, stood by the open door. It was time to leave. This was not an escape but a progression. She was not returning to a life of hiding, but stepping into her role as the head of her own house, the guardian of a dynasty. As she walked towards the car, her steps were not those of a victim. They were the measured, confident strides of a queen, leaving the chaos of a foolish man's war behind her, turning her face towards the calm, clear horizon of her own making. The past was settled. The future was hers to command. That's the story of how a single act of betrayal awakened a sleeping giant. Isabella's journey wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming her power, her name, and her destiny from a man who saw her as nothing more than an accessory. It's a powerful reminder that the quietest people often have the deepest roots and the strongest allies. Julian Vance thought he was the king of his world, but he was merely a pawn in a much older, much grander game. Isabella didn't just win. She rewrote the rules and took the entire board. If you were captivated by Isabella's story of epic justice and hidden power, don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with someone who loves a story of ultimate triumph. What was your favorite twist? Let us know in the comments below. And for more gripping tales of drama and empowerment, make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next. The air on Calavigny Island tasted of salt and betrayal. One moment, Hayley Devereux was the pregnant, adored wife of a tech billionaire. The next, she was a spectacle of public humiliation. Under the glittering lights of his lavish party, her husband, Sebastian, didn't just end their marriage. He detonated it. With his mistress clinging to his arm, he publicly renounced Hayley and the child she carried, leaving her stranded on his private paradise as a tropical storm gathered on the horizon. He thought he had erased her, but he made one fatal mistake. He left her alive. The journey to Calavigny Island began not with the gentle hum of the Gulf Stream G750, but with the subtle, chilling click of a platinum lighter. Sebastian Devereux lit his Cuban cigar, the cherry glowing like a malevolent eye in the jet's dim cabin. He didn't offer one to his associates, and he didn't look at his wife, Hayley, who sat across from him, her hands resting protectively on the swell of her 5-month pregnancy. "It has to be perfect, Jenna," he said, his voice a low baritone that had charmed boardrooms and investors, into handing over fortunes. The smoke he exhaled coiled towards the ceiling. This party isn't just a party. It's a statement. It's the culmination of the Ethelred acquisition. Everyone who is anyone will be there. We need to project unassailable strength. Haley managed a small smile. Everything you do is perfect, Seb. It was the answer he expected, the one she had learned to give. Their life was a meticulously curated exhibition of success, and she was its most beautiful, most serene installation. They had met 3 years prior at a Sotheby's auction. She was a junior art consultant, advising a client on a minor Degas sculpture. He wasn't bidding. He was buying the auction house. He'd been captivated by her quiet intelligence and the way she spoke about art, with a passion that felt alien in his world of algorithms and market capitalizations. For Haley, a woman raised by a university professor and a librarian in a quiet corner of Connecticut, Sebastian was a force of nature. His ambition was a gravitational pull she couldn't resist. He'd showered her with a life ripped from the pages of a luxury magazine, a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a villa in Lake Como, and a wardrobe that cost more than her parents' house. He loved her, she believed, for being his anchor, his peace in a world of cutthroat competition. But the gilded cage, no matter how opulent, was still a cage. Her opinions on art were now used to decorate his corporate lobbies. Her friends with their normal jobs and mortgages were politely phased out in favor of his circle of venture capitalists, socialites, and tech titans. He had even chosen the dress she was to wear tonight, a flowing seafoam green gown by a designer she'd never heard of. One that was meant to showcase her pregnancy in the most elegant, non-threatening way possible. The Beaumonts are arriving just after us. Sebastian continued scrolling through his phone, his thumb moving with ruthless efficiency. Blake Beaumont is a potential board member for the new conglomerate. His wife, Victoria. She can be a bit much, but she's influential. Be charming to her. Haley's smile tightened. Victoria Beaumont, a woman sculpted from marble and disdain, who looked at Haley as if she were a charming but ultimately temporary pet. Victoria was from Sebastian's world, old money, predatory ambition, and a shared history that was often hinted at but never clarified. The jet began its descent, breaking through a layer of pillowy clouds to reveal a turquoise expanse dotted with emerald islands. In the center, like a jewel, was Calavigny. It was Sebastian's ultimate status symbol, an 80-acre private island in the Grenadines that he'd purchased for an obscene sum. He'd spent 2 years and $100 million transforming it into his personal fiefdom, a paradise of Balinese-style villas, private beaches, and manicured jungle paths. As the plane touched down on the private airstrip, the cabin door opened to a wall of humid, fragrant air. A fleet of custom golf carts waited to whisk them to the main residence, a sprawling architectural masterpiece named The Overlook. Staff in crisp white uniforms lined the path, their heads bowed. It was a royal welcome. "Remember, Jenna?" Sebastian murmured, his hand on the small of her back, his touch feeling more like a positioning than a caress. Flawless. "Tonight we are untouchable." She nodded, the baby inside her, giving a gentle kick a secret reassurance. She walked beside her husband into the heart of the magnificent home. The sound of a string quartet already drifting from the grand terrace. Guests were beginning to arrive, their laughter mingling with the clinking of champagne flutes. Everything was bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. It was, by all accounts, perfect. But as a grey bank of clouds began to mass on the distant horizon, Haley felt a shiver of unease a premonition as dark and foreboding as the coming storm. The perfect world. Sebastian had built felt impossibly fragile, like a house of cards waiting for a single, malicious puff of wind. She was about to find out that the wind was already in the room, and it was wearing Victoria Beaumont's smile. The party was an exercise in calculated excess. An oyster bar featured mollusks flown in from 5 different countries. A vodka luge carved from a single block of ice into a replica of Sebastian's corporate logo was the centerpiece of the main bar. Tech billionaires mingled with European aristocrats and supermodels, laughed with grizzled hedge fund managers. Haley played her part, a gracious hostess, floating through the crowd, her hand never far from her belly. She saw Sebastian across the infinity pool, locked in conversation with Blake and Victoria Beaumont. Victoria was dazzling in a crimson dress that seemed to defy gravity. She laughed at something Sebastian said, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his arm and letting it linger just a moment too long. Haley had seen that gesture 100 times, a casual mark of territory that set her teeth on edge. She told herself it was just the paranoia of pregnancy. She turned to greet a senator from New York, discussing a recent museum gala when she felt a presence behind her. "You're glowing," Victoria purred her voice, like honey laced with arsenic. "Pregnancy suits you. It's so domestic." Haley forced a smile. "Thank you, Victoria. I see you're enjoying the party." "Oh, it's a Sebastian Devereaux party." "They're always legendary," Victoria replied, her eyes scanning Haley from head to toe. "That's a lovely color on you. Did Sebastian pick it out?" He always had such specific tastes. The implication was clear. Another subtle jab to remind Haley of her place. Before she could respond, a low rumble echoed from across the sea. The wind picked up, rustling the palm fronds and making the paper lanterns dance violently. The sky, once a canvas of pastel sunset hues, was now a bruised purple. "Looks like we're in for a show," Victoria said with a smirk, seemingly unbothered. An hour later, the show began. The storm hit not with a gentle prelude, but with a sudden, furious onslaught. Rain came down in blinding sheets, driving the guests from the exposed terraces into the cavernous main hall of the Overlook. The string quartet was replaced by the roar of the wind and the percussive crash of waves against the cliffs below. The lights flickered, casting the panicked faces of the elite in a strobe-like effect. In the ensuing chaos, Haley searched for Sebastian. She found him near the grand fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking utterly calm. He was with Victoria again. Blake was nowhere to be seen. "Seb, the staff is trying to get everyone to the storm shelters in the guest villas." Haley said, her voice tight with anxiety. "We should coordinate," he cut her off. His eyes cold and distant. "Everything is under control, Haley. Go and rest. You look pale." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a dismissal. Hurt and confused, she began to walk away, but his next words stopped her dead. "She knows, Vic. It's time." The words were a low murmur, but in a sudden lull in the storm's fury, they carried across the marble floor with perfect, devastating clarity. Haley turned back slowly. Victoria was looking at her, a triumphant, pitying smile on her face. Sebastian's expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. "Knows what Seb?" Haley asked, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. "What's going on?" Sebastian sighed, a theatrical sound of weary impatience. He took a step forward, and the small crowd that had been huddled nearby fell silent, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. The drama of the storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest brewing within the walls of the Overlook. This he said, gesturing vaguely between himself and Haley. This arrangement, it has run its course. Haley's blood ran cold. Arrangement? You mean our marriage? I mean, the charade. He corrected his voice, rising, capturing the attention of everyone in the room. He was performing now. This was his stage. I needed a certain image for the Ethelred deal. A stable, traditional man. You played that part beautifully, I'll admit. A collective gasp went through the audience of his peers. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Haley felt her face flush with heat, 100 pairs of eyes on her, dissecting her humiliation. The deal is done. Sebastian continued, his voice devoid of any emotion. My company is secure, and I no longer require the props. Props. Her voice was a choked whisper. She looked down at her own hands, resting on the life inside her. Is that what your son is to you? A prop. Sebastian laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. My son? Oh, Haley, you are delightfully naive. I have my lawyers the best in the world. They've raised some very interesting questions about the timeline of your pregnancy, about your fidelity. The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was a lie, a monstrous, baseless lie. But he said it with such conviction that doubt flickered in the eyes of the onlookers. He was poisoning the well, destroying her reputation to ensure his own clean getaway. That's not true, she breathed, shaking her head in disbelief. You know that's not true. Does it matter? He shot back. I'm Sebastian Devereux. My truth is the one that gets printed. He then turned and took Victoria's hand, pulling her to his side. He held her hand up for all to see. Victoria and I are going to be together. It's been a long time coming. She understands my world. She belongs in it. Victoria looked at Haley, her eyes gleaming with victory. She had won. You will be given a severance, Sebastian said, as if firing a disloyal employee. Generous, of course. You'll sign a non-disclosure agreement, and you will disappear quietly. My jet will take you back to the mainland in the morning after the storm passes. The staff will show you to a guest room. He turned his back on her, a final, brutal act of dismissal. He had just executed her socially and emotionally in front of the most powerful people he knew. Stranded pregnant and publicly branded an unfaithful, disposable wife, Haley stood frozen in the center of the room. The lights flickered again, and then died, completely plunging the hall into darkness, save for the frantic beams of staff flashlights and the periodic terrifying flashes of lightning from outside. In that moment of absolute darkness, a tear finally escaped and traced a path down her cheek. It felt as hot as acid. The gilded cage hadn't just opened. It had been vaporized, and she was left falling with no ground in sight. The darkness was a perverse mercy. It hid the smirks, the pitying glances, the avid curiosity on the faces of the guests. A member of the staff, a young woman named Sophia, whose kindness had always seemed genuine, gently touched Haley's arm. Ma'am, let me take you to your room. It's not safe here. Haley allowed herself to be led away, moving like a sleepwalker through the opulent halls that now felt like a mausoleum. The room they took her to was not her own. It was a sterile, impersonal guest suite at the far end of the estate, as far from Sebastian as possible. Sophia lit some candles, her expression full of a sorrow she couldn't voice. Is there anything I can get you? Mrs. Devereux. The name was a slap. Don't call me that. Haley whispered, her voice raw. "My name is Haley McClellan." Reclaiming her maiden name was the first act of defiance, a tiny spark in the crushing darkness. Sophia nodded and quietly left, closing the door behind her. Haley was alone with the roaring storm and the ruins of her life. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her body trembling. The baby kicked a frantic, insistent rhythm, as if sensing its mother's distress. She wasn't just heartbroken. She was terrified. Sebastian's lie about her fidelity wasn't just a cruel parting shot. It was a strategic move to disown their child, to absolve himself of all responsibility, to paint her as a gold-digging fraud. He controlled the media, the lawyers, the narrative. If she stayed, she'd be trapped in a public relations war she couldn't possibly win. He would crush her. She and her child would be footnotes in the story of his glorious rise, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. She couldn't let that happen. Her child deserved more than a life lived in the shadow of Sebastian's lies. An idea, wild and desperate, began to form. Disappear. Not just leave, but vanish. He expected her to take his severance and slink away broken. He would never expect her to simply cease to exist. The storm was her cover. The chaos was her opportunity. Driven by a surge of adrenaline-fueled clarity, Haley stood up. She couldn't take anything that belonged to him. Not the designer clothes in the closet, not the jewels in the safe. She took off the 7-carat diamond ring he'd placed on her finger and set it on the nightstand. It felt like removing a shackle. She was wearing only the seafoam green gown, now damp and stained. It would have to do. She went to the window. It overlooked a steep garden path that led down towards a small, private cove, one rarely used by guests. The rain was relentless, turning the manicured landscape into a treacherous river of mud. It was dangerous, but staying was a death sentence of a different kind. Taking a deep breath, she slipped out of the villa. The wind tore at her, plastering the thin fabric of her dress to her body. She was instantly soaked to the bone. Her hair whipped across her face, blinding her. She half ran, half slid down the muddy path, grabbing onto tree trunks and roots to keep from falling. Thorns tore at her dress and her skin. The perfect paradise had become a hostile wilderness. She reached the cove. The waves were monstrous, crashing against the rocks with a terrifying power. A small boat dock used for jet skis and tenders was being battered by the surf. Tied to it was a small inflatable Zodiac boat, its motor covered with a tarp probably left by a maintenance worker who had fled for shelter. It was her only chance. Her fingers were numb with cold as she struggled with the ropes. A massive wave crashed over the dock, nearly sweeping her off her feet. She clung to a piling, her knuckles white. The baby felt like a lead weight in her belly. "We can do this," she thought, a mantra against the screaming wind. "We have to do this." Finally, the last knot gave way. She clambered into the Zodiac, her body screaming with protest. She fumbled with the tarp, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip it. She pulled the cord on the small outboard motor. Nothing. Again. Nothing. Panic began to set in. On the third pull, a wave of desperation lending her strength. The motor sputtered to life with a choked cough. She steered the small boat away from the island into the churning Black Sea. It was an act of insanity. The Zodiac was tossed about like a toy, cresting massive waves that threatened to swallow it whole. Salt spray stung her eyes, and the roar of the engine was lost in the fury of the storm. She had no idea where she was going, only that she was moving away from Sebastian, away from the life that had tried to destroy her. She didn't know how long she fought the storm. It could have been minutes or hours. Her arms ached, her body was bruised, and a chilling exhaustion was seeping into her bones. The lights of Calavigny Island were long gone. She was a tiny, insignificant speck in a world of violent water and wind. Just as she felt her strength give out, as the engine sputtered and died, a light cut through the rain. It was a beam, powerful and steady, sweeping across the waves. It found her. The beam belonged to a larger vessel, a sturdy-looking yacht that was riding out the storm in the lee of a neighboring smaller island. Men were shouting. A rope ladder was thrown down. Strong hands pulled her from the half-swamped Zodiac onto the deck of the yacht. She collapsed, shivering and incoherent, into the arms of a figure who wrapped her in a thick, dry blanket. She looked up into the face of an old man, with kind, concerned eyes and a shock of white hair. He was a guest from the party she vaguely recalled, an investor from a bygone era, one who had watched the evening's drama unfold with a quiet, thoughtful detachment. "You're safe now, my dear," he said, his voice a calm anchor in the chaos. "My name is Desmond Wallace, and I think it's fair to say your life has just taken a rather dramatic turn. Let's get you warm, and then we can decide what comes next." As she slipped into an exhausted unconsciousness, Hayley McClellan knew one thing for certain. Her old life was over, drowned in the storm. A new one, terrifying and unknown, had just begun. The next 5 years were a lifetime. Hayley awoke on Desmond Wallace's yacht, the Wanderer. Not as a victim, but as a blank slate. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky of impossible blue and a sea as calm as glass. Calavigny Island was a distant smudge on the horizon, a place she vowed never to see again, not as she was. Desmond Wallace was more than just a kind stranger. He was a legend in the world of old money and discreet power. A self-made shipping magnate who had cashed out decades ago, he had watched men like Sebastian Devereux, arrogant, flashy, and ultimately hollow, rise and fall like the tides. He had seen the cruelty at the party, and in Hayley he saw not a broken woman, but a core of tempered steel she didn't yet know she possessed. He made a grave error, Hayley Desmond told her over a cup of tea in his yacht's study. A room panelled in rich mahogany and lined with books. "He underestimated you. Men like Devereux always do. They see a beautiful wife, not a brilliant partner. Their ego is their Achilles' heel. He offered her a choice. He could arrange for her to be safely and anonymously returned to the United States with a small trust fund to start over. Or she could stay with him, learn from him, and forge a new identity, a new life on her own terms. Revenge is a fool's game," he said, his gaze steady. "But justice is the business of building a better future on the wreckage of the past. He tried to erase you. The greatest justice it is not to haunt him, but to become someone he could never imagine." Hayley chose the latter. Her son was born 3 months later in a private clinic in Geneva, Switzerland. She named him Leo, for the lion-hearted courage he had given her. Holding him for the first time, she knew she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was building a dynasty for him, a legacy free from the taint of the Devereux name. Under Desmond's tutelage, Hayley McClellan ceased to exist. In her place emerged Hayley Monroe, a name chosen for its classic strength. She devoured Desmond's library, learning about global finance, sovereign debt, emerging markets, and corporate law. She had a natural aptitude for seeing patterns, a skill honed during her years studying art history, and she applied it to the complex tapestry of the financial world. Desmond treated her like the daughter he never had. He taught her how to negotiate with sharks, how to leverage debt, how to create shell corporations and offshore accounts, not for evasion, but for protection and strategic advantage. He refined her, sharpening her intellect until it was a weapon. She learned 4 languages. She traveled with him on the Wanderer, sitting in on meetings in Hong Kong, Dubai, and Monaco, a silent observer who absorbed everything. Leo grew up on the yacht, his world a shifting landscape of international ports and the unwavering love of his mother. He had her thoughtful eyes, and to Haley's secret, painful acknowledgement, Sebastian's determined chin. He was smart, resilient, and knew nothing of the father who had disowned him. His father, in every way that mattered, was the kind old man who taught him how to fish off the coast of Greece and read him stories about great explorers. When Leo was 4, Desmond's health began to fail. He had lived a full life and was ready for its final chapter. One afternoon, anchored off the coast of Croatia, he called Haley to his study. "I'm not leaving you a fortune, my dear," he said, his voice weaker now, but still clear. "I'm leaving you an arsenal. The companies, the accounts, the contacts, they are all tools. What you build with them is up to you." He passed away a week later, peacefully in his sleep. His will was simple. The bulk of his vast, labyrinthine estate was left to a charitable foundation, but a significant, strategically chosen portfolio of assets, worth nearly $1 billion if managed correctly, was left to one Haley Monroe. Along with it was a single sealed envelope. Inside was a short letter. "My dearest Haley, I hope I have given you the means to secure your and Leo's future. But I know you. You have a fire in you that peace alone will not quench. There is one piece of unfinished business. I have learned through my network that Sebastian Devereux is selling Calivigny Island. His tech empire is over-leveraged, and he needs liquid capital. He sees the island as a monument to a past triumph. I see it as a stage. Go and claim it. Not for revenge, but to prove once and for all that the future is not written by the men who build gilded cages, but by the women who learn to fly out of them. Your friend Desmond." Reading the letter, Haley felt a chill run down her spine. The island, the site of her greatest humiliation. For 5 years, she had meticulously built a fortress around her heart, focusing only on the future. But Desmond was right. To truly be free, she had to go back to the beginning. She had to face the ghost of her past. She looked at the financial reports Desmond had left her. She saw the network of holding companies, the web of assets. She began to formulate a plan, not with the desperation of an escaped victim, but with the cold, calculating precision of a corporate raider. Sebastian Devereux thought he had destroyed Haley McClellan 5 years ago in a storm. He had no idea that he had inadvertently forged Haley Monroe in the crucible of his own cruelty. And she was coming back to collect. The sale of Calivigny Island was not a public affair. It was a quiet, discreet offering circulated among the world's ultra-elite through a handful of exclusive brokerage firms in Zurich and London. Sebastian Devereux, true to form, couldn't bear the public humiliation of a fire sale. The official narrative was that he was realigning his portfolio to focus on new philanthropic ventures. It was a lie, and everyone in his circle knew it. His tech company, Ethelred, once the darling of Silicon Valley, was hemorrhaging money. A series of disastrous product launches and a nasty patent lawsuit had eroded investor confidence. The stock was in a death spiral. Sebastian and Victoria's lavish lifestyle, once funded by soaring profits, was now financed by debt. The island was his most liquid, most valuable, non-corporate asset. He needed to sell, and he needed to sell fast. From a quiet, modern office in Geneva, Haley Monroe orchestrated her attack. She was no longer a woman in a seafoam green dress. She was a spectre in the machine, a name on a letterhead that no one could trace back to the wife Sebastian had discarded. She operated through 3 different shell corporations, registered in 3 different countries. A real estate holding firm in the Cayman Islands, a financial services company in Luxembourg, and a consulting group in Delaware. Each was a cutout, a layer of insulation between her and the final transaction. Her lead negotiator was a shrewd, silver-haired Swiss lawyer named Anton Gruber, a man who had been fiercely loyal to Desmond Wallace for 40 years. He never asked about his new client's motives. He only executed her instructions with brutal efficiency. Sebastian's asking price was $150 million. It was inflated based on what he had spent on it, not its current market value. He's sentimental, and he's desperate, Haley told Anton over a secure video call. His ego won't let him accept a low-ball offer, so we won't make one. We will make him feel like he's winning right up until the end. Their first move was to create a competitor. Haley used the Delaware Corporation to put in a deliberately clumsy low offer of $90 million, leaking it to a financial gossip blog. The story framed it as an insult, a sign of Devereaux's fallen status. Sebastian, predictably, was enraged. He publicly rejected the offer, his pride forcing him to hold firm on his price. That was when Anton Gruber, representing the Luxembourg firm Orion Capital, entered the picture. He approached Sebastian's brokers with a much more serious offer of $125 million. He was professional, courteous, and projected an air of immense old-world wealth. After the insult of the first bid, Sebastian saw Orion Capital as a serious, respectable buyer. The negotiations dragged on for weeks. Sebastian, squeezed by his creditors, pushed for a higher price. Haley, through Anton, held firm. She knew Sebastian's quarterly earnings report was due to be released, and she had done her homework. It was going to be a bloodbath. The day the disastrous report was published, Ethelred stock plunged another 30%. Sebastian's bankers were calling. The pressure was immense. That same afternoon, Anton received a call. Sebastian would accept the $125 million, but he had one condition: a fast, all-cash closing in under a week, with no contingencies. It was a move designed to weed out anyone who didn't have immediate access to that kind of capital. "He is testing us," Anton told Haley. "He believes no one can move that quickly." "He's right," Haley said with a thin smile. "No one can. But we can." She initiated a complex series of wire transfers, moving funds from various accounts Desmond had left, her routing them through the Cayman Islands holding company, and finally consolidating them in an escrow account managed by Orion Capital in Zurich. It was a symphony of international finance, conducted flawlessly. 5 days later, the deal was ready to close. The final contracts were to be signed. The buyer was listed as Kalivigny Holdings Limited, a subsidiary of Orion Capital. The signatory for the buyer was Anton Gruber. Haley's name was nowhere on the documents. From her office in Geneva, she watched a live feed from the closing room in Zurich. She saw Sebastian Devereaux on the screen, looking older and more strained than she remembered. The easy arrogance was gone, replaced by a tense, brittle facade. Victoria was not with him. He signed the documents with a flourish of his pen, a man trying to pretend he was in control of a situation that had spiraled far beyond him. Once his signature was on the page, Anton signed for the buyer. A lawyer nodded. The deal was done. The island was hers. Haley felt no elation, no thrill of victory, just a profound quiet and deeply satisfying sense of completion. It was a transaction. A problem had been solved. A debt had been settled. She leaned back in her chair and looked out the window at Lake Geneva. The first phase of her plan was complete. Now it was time to prepare the stage. She picked up her phone and dialed her new estate manager, a woman hand-picked for her discretion and impeccable taste. "Good morning, Catherine Haley," said her voice, calm and steady. "We can now begin the renovations on the island. I have the guest list for the grand reopening party. I want the invitations sent out by the end of the week. Oh, and Catherine. The new owner wishes to remain anonymous for now. All correspondence should be from GM Enterprises." She hung up the phone. GM Haley Monroe, a name Sebastian Devereux would not recognize. But soon he would. He and everyone else who had watched her fall would be invited back to the scene of the crime. Only this time she wouldn't be the spectacle. She would be the architect. The invitation arrived in a world that had moved on. 5 years is an eternity in the sphere of the ultra-rich. Fortunes are made. Empires crumble. Alliances shift. For Sebastian and Victoria Devereux. The past 5 years had been a slow, grinding descent. The sale of the island had provided a temporary reprieve, but it was like using a teacup to bail out a sinking ship. Ethelred was a shadow of its former self, propped up by risky loans and the sheer force of Sebastian's denial. Their social standing, once unassailable, had become precarious. They were no longer the power couple everyone clamored to be near. They were the couple people whispered about their troubles a source of delicious gossip. Their marriage, born of ambition and betrayal, had curdled into a partnership of mutual resentment, held together only by a shared fear of losing their status. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a private courier. It was a heavy, cream-colored card, thick as a book cover, with minimalist, embossed gold lettering. There was no gaudy crest, no ostentatious design. Its power lay in its understated elegance. GM Enterprises cordially invites you to celebrate the reawakening of Kalevinni Island. A weekend of tranquility and new beginnings. The date was set for a month away. The details were sparse, promising private jet transport from select global capitals and an experience of unparalleled bespoke luxury. The host was identified only as the island's new anonymous owner. Victoria, her face a carefully maintained mask of cosmetic enhancements, turned the card over in her hands. GM Enterprises, who the hell is that? Must be some new Russian oligarch or a Saudi prince. Tacky to be so mysterious. Sebastian, however, felt a flicker of something else. Not excitement, but a gnawing curiosity mixed with the bitter tang of loss. "Everyone is talking about it," he said, scrolling through his phone. "The entire guest list from that night. They all got at one. It's a power play. The new owner is making a statement inviting the old king's court to see the new regime." "So we're not going," Victoria stated flatly. The island held nothing but sour memories for her, now a monument to a victory that had ultimately felt hollow. "We have to go," Sebastian countered, his voice sharp. Not going would be an admission of defeat. It would be telling the world that we can't stand to see someone else own our old property. It would be weak. We will go, we will smile, we will praise the new owner's taste, and we will act as if selling that rock was the smartest decision we ever made. We have to maintain appearances, Victoria. It's all we have left. And so they accepted, as did everyone else. The mystery was too tantalizing to ignore. For the next month, the sole topic of conversation in their elite circles was the identity of GM. On the appointed day, Sebastian and Victoria boarded a chartered jet, a far cry from their old G650. The other passengers were familiar faces from their past, the same hedge fund managers, socialites, and tech moguls. But the atmosphere was different. The fawning respect they once commanded was gone, replaced by a polite, cool distance. They were no longer the sun around which these people orbited. They were just two more guests. As the jet descended towards the familiar airstrip, Sebastian felt a pit in his stomach. The island looked different, more lush. The main residence, the overlook, had been subtly altered. The stark modernist lines he had favored were softened by cascades of vibrant bougainvillea. The architecture was the same, but the soul of the place felt new. They were greeted not by staff in starchy formal uniforms, but by hosts in elegant flowing linen. The atmosphere was not one of opulent servitude, but of relaxed, confident hospitality. There was no string quartet playing Vivaldi, but the sophisticated ambient tones of a modern electronic composer. Their bags were whisked away to their suite, a guest villa not the owner's residence they had once occupied. It was the very same suite where Haley had been sent after her public humiliation. The irony was so thick it was suffocating, though Sebastian was the only one who seemed to notice. That evening, the welcome reception was held on the main terrace. It mirrored the party from 5 years ago, yet it was an inversion of it. The garish ice sculpture was gone, replaced by a stunning piece of modern art. The food was not a buffet of excess, but a curated selection of exquisite, locally sourced tapas. Everything was better, more tasteful, more confident, more powerful. Sebastian felt a growing sense of unease. This wasn't the work of some new money brute. This was the work of someone with impeccable taste and a deep understanding of psychology. Someone who knew exactly what this place once represented and was systematically dismantling it. He and Victoria mingled, putting on their brave faces, but the whispers were everywhere. "Who is GM? Have you seen the new art collection? I heard they bought the island for cash, no financing." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the assembled guests, a woman, the estate manager Catherine, stepped onto a small, discreet stage. "Good evening, everyone, and welcome," she said, her voice amplified just enough to be heard over the gentle music. "On behalf of our host, we are so thrilled you could join us for this special weekend." In a few moments, the owner of this island, the visionary behind GM Enterprises, would like to say a few words. A buzz of anticipation went through the crowd. Everyone craned their necks, looking towards the main entrance of the villa. Sebastian found himself holding his breath. He needed to see the person who had done this, the person who had bought his past and so effortlessly improved upon it. The music softened. The lights on the terrace dimmed slightly, focusing all attention on the empty stage. The moment was pregnant with expectation, and from the shadows of the grand archway, a figure emerged. A woman. She was tall and poised, wearing a simple but exquisitely cut evening gown of deep sapphire blue. Her hair was pulled back, accentuating a face that was both familiar and terrifyingly new. It was a face sculpted by strength, intelligence, and an unshakable, chilling calm. A collective audible gasp rippled through the guests. Victoria's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the stone terrace. Sebastian felt the blood drain from his face. His heart stopped. He was looking at a ghost. But she was not a ghost. She was real. It was Haley. She walked to the center of the stage, her movements possessing a liquid grace that was utterly captivating. The sapphire dress, a column of midnight silk, seemed to absorb the ambient light, making her the undeniable focal point of the entire terrace. She didn't look angry or triumphant or vengeful. She looked serene, a queen, taking her place on her throne not by conquest but by divine right. Her posture was perfect, her shoulders back radiating a confidence that was so absolute it felt like a physical force. This was not the gentle, accommodating Haley they remembered. This was a woman forged in a fire they couldn't possibly comprehend. A staff member offered her a microphone, but she waited a long, deliberate moment before taking it, letting the silence and the crushing weight of the crowd's shock settle over the terrace. Her eyes, cool and analytical, swept across the sea of stunned, upturned faces. They passed over tech moguls who had once ignored her and socialites who had whispered about her. Finally, her gaze landed on Sebastian and Victoria. She held their stare for a single protracted heartbeat, a moment stretched into an eternity. In that silent, chilling acknowledgement, they knew, with bone-deep certainty, that this was not a coincidence. This was not a chance encounter. This was an appointment, an execution meticulously planned and 5 years in the making. Victoria's manicured fingers tightened on the stem of her wine glass, the crystal groaning under the pressure. Beside her, Sebastian stood utterly frozen, a statue of disbelief carved from ice. The man who always had a plan, always had an angle, was completely, terrifyingly adrift. His mind, usually a supersonic calculator of risk and opportunity, was blank with static. Impossible. It's not her. It's a trick. A ghost. But his heart, hammering against his ribs, knew the truth. "Welcome back to Calavigny Island," Haley finally said. Her voice was not the soft, hesitant tone he remembered. It was richer, deeper, and resonated with an unshakable authority that commanded the attention of every person present. "I see some familiar faces. It's been 5 years. A great deal can change in 5 years." She paused, allowing the profound understatement to land with the force of a physical blow. The whispers began to erupt, a panicked, sibilant sound like dry leaves, skittering across pavement. "It's her. My God. It's actually her. How is this possible? Where did she get the money?" Sebastian could feel the collective gaze of the crowd shift, flickering between the woman on the stage and him. He was no longer a guest. He was part of the spectacle. The other half of a story, whose ending he had written long ago only to find the protagonist had returned to pen a final, brutal chapter. "Some of you may remember me," she continued, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. It wasn't a smile of warmth, but of supreme, untouchable control, though perhaps in a different context. "The last time we were all gathered here on a rather stormy evening, I was the wife of the host. Tonight, she let the words hang in the air, each one a perfectly polished stone dropped into a silent pool. I am simply the host." The implication was a thunderclap. Victoria let out a small, strangled gasp. The wine glass, forgotten in her hand, slipped from her nerveless fingers. It did not shatter on the stone terrace. It landed on the manicured lawn, just beside it, with a dull, muffled thud, a sound of anticlimax that was somehow more unnerving than a crash. "I understand there is some curiosity," Haley said, her voice smoothly overriding the rising clamor. "Let me be clear. This weekend is not about dwelling on the past. It is about building the future. It is about celebrating new beginnings." Her eyes swept the horizon towards the setting sun, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. This island, once a symbol of brittle, fleeting power, a monument to an ego, is being reborn. It will now be the headquarters for my foundation, a sanctuary dedicated to supporting emerging artists and entrepreneurs who value creativity over currency. She was rewriting history, erasing his legacy with a few effortless sentences and replacing it with her own nobler vision. Every word was a calculated demolition of the world he had built. He had used the island to project strength. She was using it to project purpose. The comparison was devastating, and he could feel the judgment of his peers turning on him. However, she added, and her tone shifted, the philanthropic warmth evaporating, replaced by the chilling precision of a boardroom executioner. New beginnings sometimes require the clearing of old debts, and in the world of business, as we all know, all debts must eventually be paid. Her eyes, like chips of obsidian, locked onto Sebastian's. He felt pinned by her gaze, a specimen under a microscope. For instance, Haley said, her voice now a clinical, dispassionate instrument. "Some of you here tonight are investors in a company called Ethelred. My advice as a courtesy from your host would be to divest immediately. Their recent financing, the series of high-risk loans that have been keeping them afloat for the past 6 months, were not from a traditional banking institution. They were extended by a private equity firm, a rather aggressive firm named Orion Capital." A new wave of murmurs, this time laced with genuine financial panic, rippled through the guests. Several people, no longer trying to be discreet, pulled out their phones and began typing furiously. The name Orion Capital meant nothing to them, but the warning from the woman who clearly held all the cards was enough. But to Sebastian, the name was a death knell. Orion Capital was his lifeline, his secret savior, the anonymous entity that had given him the capital to stave off ruin. A cold dread, slick and oily, coiled in his stomach as he began to connect the impossible dots. Haley let him squirm in that silent horror for a moment before continuing. Orion Capital, as of last week, was acquired in a rather swift, hostile takeover by my own holding company, which means, Sebastian, that the 9-figure debt you thought you owed to a stranger, you now owe to me. The crowd gasped as one. This was beyond revenge. This was a strategic masterwork of such breathtaking cruelty that it bordered on art. "I'm calling in the loan," she stated as simply as if she were ordering a coffee. "All of it. The covenants in your agreement are rather strict, as desperate men tend to overlook the fine print. I believe the default clause can be triggered by me at my sole discretion, and I am exercising that discretion. Effective tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. Zurich time, your company will be in receivership. My people will be at your offices to oversee the liquidation." Sebastian actually staggered a step back, his hand flying to a nearby pillar for support. This was it. The end. Not just failure, but total annihilation delivered publicly by the woman he had tried to erase. Haley's gaze then shifted with chilling nonchalance to Victoria. And Victoria, your new lifestyle brand, a noble effort to remain relevant. Unfortunately, your primary seed investor, a small venture capital fund called Beaumont Ventures, has also just been acquired by a subsidiary of GM Enterprises. We will be re-evaluating all current investments, and I'm afraid a vanity project with no discernible path to profitability does not align with our portfolio strategy. Your funding will be terminated effective immediately. If Sebastian's ruin was a cannon blast, Victoria's was the silent, deadly slice of a stiletto. Her carefully constructed world of influence and appearances evaporated in an instant. The color drained from her face, leaving a pale, taut mask of shock and hatred. Having delivered her financial death blows, Haley's expression softened, but it was a change that brought no comfort. It was the prelude to the final, most personal devastation. But as I said, she repeated, her voice now imbued with a quiet power. Tonight is about the future. From the shadows at the side of the stage, a door to the main residence opened. The estate manager, Catherine, emerged holding the hand of a small boy, no older than 5. He was dressed in a simple white linen shirt and trousers, his dark hair neatly combed. He walked with a child's unself-conscious curiosity, his eyes taking in the strange crowd. He walked straight to Haley, who knelt down, her entire being softening as she wrapped a protective arm around him. "I would like you all to meet the true owner of this island's future," she said, her voice thick with a love that was a tangible, fiercely protective force. "This is my son, Leo." Leo looked out at the crowd, his gaze unafraid. He had his mother's thoughtful eyes, but everything else, the dark, unruly hair, the strong set of his jaw, the determined shape of his chin, was pure, undiluted Devereaux. He was the spitting image of a younger, uncorrupted Sebastian. The paternity he had so publicly and callously questioned 5 years ago was now presented as irrefutable evidence to the very same jury that had witnessed his crime. The silence on the terrace was absolute, profound. It was the silence of a tomb. The social and emotional checkmate was complete. Every lie Sebastian had ever told about her, about their child, was laid bare for all to see. Haley stood up, holding her son's hand firmly in hers. She didn't spare another glance for the wreckage she had wrought. She didn't need to gloat or scream. Her victory was in her calm, in her control, in the simple, undeniable fact that she was standing there, whole and powerful, with her son by her side. She looked at Sebastian one last time, and there was nothing in her eyes. Not hatred, not pity, not even the memory of love. It was the flat, dismissive look one gives to a piece of furniture, to something utterly irrelevant that is about to be removed. "Enjoy the party," she said to the assembled guests, her voice once again the gracious host. Then she turned her back on her former husband, on the woman who had replaced her, and on the entire life that had almost destroyed her. She walked off the stage with her son, disappearing back into the magnificent home that was now hers, leaving everyone else standing in the beautiful, perfect, and utterly ruthless world she had created. The party's ambient music swelled to fill the silence, but it couldn't hide the sound of a world ending for the 2 figures left standing alone in the center of it all. That night, Haley Monroe didn't just reclaim her name. She forged a new legend. Her story became a whisper, then a roar in the circles of the powerful, a testament to the fact that true strength isn't about the castles you build, but the ashes you rise from. She transformed Calavigny Island from a monument of ego into a beacon of hope, proving that the deepest betrayals can fuel the most incredible transformations. Her revenge wasn't loud or explosive. It was the quiet, undeniable hum of a new empire being built upon the foundations of an old one's collapse. She became the architect of her own destiny, the queen of her own island, and a mother who showed her son that a person's worth is not determined by who tried to break them, but by how they choose to rebuild. What did you think of Hayley's ultimate comeback? Was her justice served cold, or was it just right? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you've ever had a moment where you had to rise from the ashes, share your story of strength. We are inspired by resilience. For more stories of incredible twists and ultimate triumph, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs a dose of inspiration, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more compelling stories like this to you.